Chapter 24, Desperate Measures. With Bess and George waiting eagerly, Nancy looked inside the briefcase and exclaimed, "This is Mr. Koff's all right. Here's his full name and address pasted on the inside." Bess, peering over Nancy's shoulder, suddenly cried out, "Oh, Nancy, put it down!" "Why?" George demanded. "Because," Bess told her fearfully, "there's a notice in it that says, 'Do not read the contents or you will die.'" "That's ridiculous," George said in disgust. "Nancy, you aren't going to let that stop you, are you?" "Not that threat," Nancy replied, "because I doubt that Mr. Koff wrote it. I would return the briefcase to him without looking at the letters, except for one thing." "What's that?" Nancy picked up an envelope on which had been scrawled, "From Red Busby." "Remember the red-haired man?" she asked. "I think this is a real clue. I vote we take the briefcase into the house and read every single letter, if we can. They may be in Centrovian." The girls climbed down the hayloft ladder and went to the house. Nancy looked around for Officer Donovan to tell him what she was going to do, but the guard was not in sight. "P.U. What a strong odor of kerosene," Bess remarked. "What would that policeman be doing with kerosene?" Nancy shrugged. She was too interested in getting at the letters to care. The first floor of the house had only one small table in the kitchen, so the three girls went upstairs to the front room and spread out the contents of the briefcase on the bed. They had been written in French, and Nancy translated one after another. She could readily see why Mr. Koff had not wanted them to fall into enemy hands. The letters hinted at drastic movements of the underground against the Centrovian occupation authorities. Suddenly, George interrupted Nancy. "Here's a typed carbon of one in English signed Busby." She read it aloud. "Dear pal, I have a plan worked out for selling these letters to those guys in Europe. It should bring us plenty in good American dollars." "How dreadfully wicked!" Bess exclaimed. Nancy nodded. "I'm certainly glad we located these letters before they were sold." She and her friends found several other notations signed by Busby. One of these, apparently an answer to some inquiry that had been made, read, "Don't worry. Nobody will ever find out who Judson is. 10561 B24. "The mysterious number again!" Bess exclaimed. "Whatever does it mean?" "I have an idea," said Nancy. "And if I'm right, the number will go a long way toward tying this mystery together." She picked up the telephone and called her father, who was working in his study at home. After reporting her discovery to him, she said, "Will you please call the French embassy and ask whether 10561 B24 could have been a passport number, and if so, to whom it was issued?" "I'll do it right away," the lawyer assured her. As Nancy hung up and turned around, the girls heard a loud clattering in the hall below and went to the stairway to investigate. Henri and Hélène Fontaine were rushing up the steps. "Nancy!" the dancers cried, and Hélène hugged her friend fervently. "Bess, George, we're so glad to see you." The girls were speechless, but finally Bess blurted out, You're not smugglers? You didn't run away?" "We were spirited away," Hélène replied. "We were told how that dreadful man René had accused us of stealing the painting with the scarlet slippers, and also of stealing a fortune in jewels," Henri added. "Tell us everything," Nancy begged, leading the way into the room. "It's so good to see you." As Henri began to talk, Bess went to close the door. The odor of kerosene was very strong now. Again, she wondered what Officer Donovan was doing with it. "Hélène and I," said Henri, "have been held prisoners ever since leaving Ned's cabin. We were brought here first by two men named Red Busby and Duparc." Busby! Nancy exclaimed. He's the one who probably stole the briefcase and planned to sell the letters. But go on. Henri continued. It seems Renee had rented this place, but Busby was using it while Renee was off on a false lead Red had given him. The day after we arrived here, Busby got word that Renee was returning in a rage, so we were taken to another deserted farmhouse located not far from here. Then it wasn't you two who were in the car that Ned saw leaving here yesterday, Nancy said. No, we were already at the other farmhouse. We managed to escape a little while ago when we found our guard had gone off duty. Hélène took up the story. We phoned your house at once. When Hannah Gruen told us that you were here, we were fearful for your safety and came right over. Nancy was touched deeply by their loyalty. If your kidnappers come here, they'll be met by a policeman, she said. Now please go on with the story. But first, I want to tell you that these papers are Mr. Koff's. I found his briefcase. How wonderful! Hélène exclaimed. Then she said, Henri and I were so happy at the Nickerson Lodge. Then, late one afternoon, 2 strange men came to the door, Busby and Duparc. They threatened us with guns, and there was nothing we could do but follow them to a car. There was no time to leave a note. Hélène said that she had phoned Nancy from the farmhouse, but Busby had caught her. He had already sent a woman friend to the telegraph office with a fake message for Nancy. Henri smiled slightly. But we told Busby that Nancy knew about the smuggling racket and was closing in on the gang. Then what happened? George prompted. They sneered and said nobody could prove them guilty. But since we were never going to be free, they would tell us the whole story. The Fontaines said that Renee and Amiens were partners in the theft of the Centrovian jewels from the underground and in the smuggling racket. They had worked on it for months, and everything had gone smoothly. First, the bisque figurines were sent to the United States, then 11 of the paintings. But before the last picture was ready to be shipped, said Henri, Amiens double-crossed Renee. He secretly sent the portrait with the scarlet slippers. Under the paint was a good part of the loot. He was in league with a New York art dealer named Duparc. Amiens came to this country to share the money from the sale of the jewels with Duparc. And left Renee out? Bess asked. Yes. Duparc is Amiens' brother-in-law. He uses the name Wart also. Nancy said excitedly, I see now how you Fontaines figure in it. Amiens sent you the warning note in France to make you flee and thus look guilty, so Renee wouldn't suspect his partner of double-crossing him. Exactly, Henri nodded. But after a while, when no money came to Renee from the sale of the jewels, he became suspicious and sailed for the United States. When he learned Duparc had disappeared, he was convinced he had been cheated and set out to find Amiens and Duparc and the Fontaines. George spoke up. I don't see where Busby figures in the deal. Henri explained that Busby was serving both sides and getting money from everyone. Actually, he was a small-time racketeer who was related to Mrs. Amiens, alias Mrs. Judson. Busby, said Henri, acted as a spy for Amiens. When Amiens learned that Renee was in the United States, he sent Red Busby to meet him. He found Renee eager to catch up with his crooked partner, and Busby assured him he knew just where to find Raoul Amiens. But he led Renee on a merry chase to keep him from finding Amiens. But I suppose, said Nancy, that Renee caught on. Yes, he accused Busby of tricking him. What did Busby do then? Bess asked. Henri said that Busby's glib tongue and quick brain had saved him. He told Renee he knew all about the man's crooked operations in France, how the authorities were looking for him, and that he could make plenty of trouble for Renee. Busby is a bad one, Hélène said. René tried to get away from him. He began to look for Amiens himself and trailed him to River Heights. At this point, Amiens became desperate and sent a second note to Henri and me to flee. But that was where his plan went wrong, George remarked. Nancy stepped into the picture and really whisked you folks out of sight, which frightened Amiens. As George finished speaking and Henri said, "That is true," Nancy suddenly sniffed. Then she glanced toward the sill of the closed door. Smoke was seeping into the room. Nancy jumped to the door. Flinging it open, she found the hall filled with smoke. "The house is on fire!" she cried in dismay. Nancy could now hear flames crackling below. She slammed the door shut and rushed to the window, looking for a means of escape. To her horror, she discovered that the grass, bushes, and side of the house were ablaze. "Oh, what do we do?" Bess wailed. The others ran from room to room and glanced outside. A wide band of fire completely encircled the house. "We must try the stairs," Henri ordered. Covering their faces with handkerchiefs, the group tried to descend the steps, but flames and smoke drove them back. The first floor of the old wooden structure was completely ablaze. Escape down the stairs was impossible. "The kerosene," Nancy thought ruefully. Someone soaked the premises inside and out and made an inferno of this place. As she dashed back into the bedroom where the briefcase and letters lay, she wondered about Officer Donovan. He must have been knocked out. Her suspicions were confirmed a moment later when through the haze outside she saw him lying at the edge of the woods. "Nancy, oh Nancy, we'll die," Bess murmured, clinging to her friend. With escape cut off, it seemed as if Bess must be right. End of chapter 24.